We live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the last episode of this year's African Literature Association Speaker Series. My name is Carli, and I've been the convener of the Speaker Series this semester. If you're watching it live, today is the last day you can register for the conference. So by midnight tonight, I don't know, I think probably midnight East Coast USA, the links will shut down and you will no longer be able to register for the conference. So please do that. It's customary to give a little history of the lecture series, and I'm aware that there's been an incorrect history circulating for a while. So the correct history is that our COVID president, Girmay Negash, started this lecture series during COVID, and we have been running it pretty consistently. There's a great archive now of the lectures, and we are very, very happy to welcome Professor Lynda Gichanda Spencer today. Professor Spencer's biography is on the invitation to you. I'm not going to read it out, but you will be familiar with her work both as an editor and as a scholar. She is someone who's made her name writing about what she calls an uprising genre. It's had different names through her career, and she and I will speak about how things change over time today, including our relationship to romance and love. And so today, Professor Spencer's talk is on a novel by a Ugandan novelist, Goretti Kyomuhendo, called Whispers from Vera. And we welcome you, Professor Spencer, and thank you so much for joining us today. Please go ahead, and there will be questions when you wrap up.
Thank you, Carli. Let me just start by sharing my slides. Okay, yeah, thanks. Thank you, Carli, for inviting me. And we just had a meeting with my fellow editors, and one of them said that I'm a celeb. I don't know what I said. What does that mean? Said, well, you're speaking at the ALA, and so thank you for making me a celeb, Carli. I want to also thank Lexi for the poster. They're beautiful. It's a beautiful poster, and all the admin involved in getting this up. And I would also like to thank everyone for taking time out of your Saturday morning, afternoon, evening to come and listen to me talk. For my friends here in South Africa, at least we have a public holiday on Monday, so this is not such a bad, it's a long weekend, so we have a bit of time of relaxation. And the public holiday that we're celebrating is the 32nd anniversary of the democratic elections that were held in 1994. So it's been a long time, and here we are now. So the idea for this paper, actually, also I would like to thank the organizers of the 6th Mashariki Conference in Kampala, because they're the ones who put me on a panel to discuss Whispers from Vera. And at that point, I thought I was discussing the novel, the novella, and it was only when I got to Kampala I realized that there's another version. And so I want to start off by giving a bit of background into who Goretti Kyomuhendo is, for those who don't know who she is, and then how the difference between these two different genres, the books, rather, not genres, books. So Goretti Kyomuhendo is a founding member of FemRight, the publishing arm of the Ugandan Women Writers Association, and she's also the founding director of the African Writers Trust, and one of Uganda's most prolific authors. She's written 5 novels: The First Daughter, Secrets No More, and her latest book is Promises. And she's also published numerous children's books and short stories, and also edited the Essential Handbook for African Creative Writers. She has an MA in creative writing from the University of KwaZulu-Natal here in South Africa, and she was one of the first Ugandan women to receive the International Writing Program Fellowship at the University of Iowa. Whispers from Vera began as a serialized column in the weekly publication, The Crusader. When The Crusader folded, Kyomuhendo was contacted by Monitor Publications Limited, the publishers of one of Uganda's leading newspapers, the Daily Monitor and Monitor Books. Because of its popularity, they were interested in turning the column into a novella. Despite Kyomuhendo's reservations, in 2002, 2,000 copies were printed, which quickly sold out. In 2003, the novella was serialized in the Daily Monitor. However, in 2004, when Monitor Publications sold the rights for their Monitor book section to Net Media, they did not reprint Whispers from Vera. It was out of print for almost 2 decades until one of Kyomuhendo's younger fans, Rachel Kiza, who had been pestering Kyomuhendo to reissue the book, handed her an electronic copy that she had retyped. Kyomuhendo explains that Kiza offered to retype the entire novel. Initially, she said, my excuse was that I couldn't find the soft copy. After she finished typing it, she emailed it to me and she said, now, what is your excuse? This coincided with COVID-19 and the subsequent restrictions and regulations. And since African Writers Trust were forced to put all their work on hold, Kyomuhendo had the time and space to think about republishing the novella. Kyomuhendo did not want to simply reprint the novella, so during the production process, she opted to work with an editorial and production team. Since Kyomuhendo's team was of a younger generation than her, it was important that they relate to Vera, and she represents their aspirations, hopes, desires, fears, anxieties. Kyomuhendo explains the editorial team was tasked with reading the manuscript not only to advise on character development, narrative voice, plot, pacing, and grammar, but also ensure that the content was suitable for the intended audience, which is primarily people within the range of 25 to 40 years. I was worried that some of the issues I'd raised were no longer as valid or relevant. I asked my editorial team to consider the ways in which perceptions about what is important to young people within that age bracket may have changed. What are romantic relationships like now? What about ambitions? What about career ambitions and aspirations and societal expectations? Therefore, the republishing of Whispers from Vera was an intergenerational and collaborative effort. Kyomuhendo is concerned with depicting how women navigate their social expectations, careers, and more importantly, romantic love. She points out that this is an old story. The issues then are still relevant today. They are realities for many women, not only in Uganda, but also in Africa and elsewhere. It's a story that will resonate with many. For those who read the first edition, this is a reworked and refreshed one with a few additions and subtractions, though the main story plot remained the same. So Kyomuhendo intimates that regardless of the generation, love can be understood as a timeless emotion that has the potential to transcend time. The result of this collaborative effort is evident in the version that was published 20 years later. Whereas the plot is the same, the second edition is more substantial in terms of character development and length. It is for these reasons I refer to the first version as a novella and the second as a novel. Whispers from Vera is written in the form of a letter in which the eponymous protagonist and narrator, Vera, gives an account of her everyday life, which includes her romantic relationships, children, marriage, and work life. The narrative, which is set in Kampala, is reminiscent of Mariama Bâ's So Long a Letter, where the protagonist, Ramutolai, writes a letter to her best friend Isa too, who was moved to the United States after her divorce from Maudoba. As a reader, it feels as though one is listening in on a private conversation between two intimate friends. The narrative, which is told in the first person, is about the experiences of Vera, a middle-class woman in contemporary Kampala, navigating her role as a wife, mother, friend, and a career woman. Vera is married to Eric, has a stepdaughter called Martina, and two sons, Kenny and Arthur. But the novella and the novel place heterosexual romantic relationships in relief against the relationships of women that is stressed even before the narrative begins through a prologue in the form of a poem dedicated to 7 women. The poem reads, "For Eva, Ayeta, Betty, Sanyu, Susan, Sandra, and Jen, R.I.P. For a friendship so deep and sincere, so unconditional and timeless, for the laughter we share, the stories we tell, the sorrows we endure together." Kyomuhendo prefixes the narrative with an appreciation of the enduring relationships between her close female friends and herself. By reflecting on the relationship with her friends, the poem suggests that the author is attentive to the strong bond shared by female friends. Although there's some changes in the novel, both narratives focus on heteronormative love, romance, and marriage. In the portrayal of the permutations of romantic love in Whispers from Vera, Kyomuhendo joins a host of African writers such as Flora Nwapa, Buche Macheta, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Chimamanda Adichie Ngozi, and Mariama Bâ, and others who have explored aspects of romantic love in their fiction. Although love has been represented in African fiction, African feminists have been reticent to theorize about love, except tangentially in the context of debates around lesbian love. Dobrota Pucherova points out that initially, African feminists rejected lesbianism, which they claimed was foreign to African women. African feminism for these critics was distinctively heterosexual, pro-natal, and concerned with many bread, butter, culture, and power issues. For these African feminist theorists, lesbian love is a white Western feminist import. For Catherine Achor-Lono, lesbian love problematically excludes men. Mary Kolawole asserts that for the majority of ordinary Africans, lesbianism is a non-existent issue, which is a mode of self-expression that is completely strange to their worldview. Kolawole's view is reiterated by Chikwenye Ogunyemi, who rationalized her rejection of lesbian love by saying that in Africa it is ignored and met with intolerance. African feminist theorization has thus disproportionately focused on lesbian love in the context of writing back to Western and African American feminist political debates, with a dearth of theory on love as a concept more broadly. However, I contend that to locate a theorization of love, one might need to look at African women's fiction, African women writers who write fiction, who have implicitly theorized romantic love in their fiction. So we need to see and look at what fiction tells us about love. For example, Maria Oluwaseun and Fiona Moller have analyzed romantic love in the works of feminist and author Ama Ata Aidoo. And yet in the preface to her novel, Changes, a Love Story, Aidoo admits that she had dismissed the subject of love because it was a frivolous topic. To the reader, a confession, and the critic, an apology. Several years ago, when I was a little older than I am now, I said in a published interview that I could never write about lovers in Accra. Because surely in our environment, there are more important things to write about. Working on this story then was an exercise in words eating. In Changes a Love Story, I Do interrogates romantic relationships and intimacy in marriage. Moreover, as Muller clearly demonstrates, elements of love can be found in almost all her work. Whereas I Do was disavowing love, intuitively, she was theorizing about it in her writing. As I mentioned earlier, love, intimacy, romance, and marriage have been portrayed in novels such as Solonga Letter, Efuru, The Secret Lives of Baba Shagai's Wives, Half of a Yellow Sun, Behind Every Successful Man, and so on. In addition, contemporary women authors do not share the same sentiments of some of the African feminists I mentioned above regarding same-sex relationships. Instead, they are courageously depicting same-sex desire in their narratives. These authors include Monica Dinyeko's Jambula Tree, Beatrice Lamwaka's Pillars of Love, Jennifer Makumbi's Kintu, Under the Udala Trees, and Go Tell the Sun, to name just a few. Pucherov argues that emerging African lesbian fiction in English is radically redefining African feminism, femininity, and society, imagining a social change toward respect for others and to the recognition of individual human rights. She suggests that we can look to African fiction to theorize because contemporary narratives are developing new ways of thinking about ideas that have either been neglected or rejected in African feminist debates. In her analysis on the representations of gender in African women's writing, Juliana Makuchi Nfa-Abenye points out that indigenous theories have always been there in the languages and cultures in Africa, in orally transmitted texts, and later in published fiction. Nfa-Abenye reads novels as theoretical texts, or what she has termed fictionalized theory or theorized fiction. For her, the theory is embedded in the polysemous and polymorphous nature of the narratives themselves. These texts reinscribe and foreground teleological, ontological, and epistemological insights and practices relevant to the specific histories and politics that preceded the fictional text. Barbara Boswell agrees with Nfa-Abenye in her reading of South African Black women's narratives. She maintains that these narratives are creative texts that may be read as theory, because historically, Black women in South Africa were denied access to sites of formal theory making. Their fiction can be viewed as a side of prodigious theoretical production, as a discursive place where they critique an existing unjust political order and imagine an alternative, more socially just world. Following on Nfa-Abenye and Boswell, I want to argue that the theories of romantic love that are rejected, absent, or silent in African feminist debates may be found in the creative works of African female authors, and that Whispers from Vera is an example of such theory. The narrative's representation of love is a critique of heteronormative relationships in a patriarchal society that seeks to continually confine women to particular roles. Instead of privileging romantic love, it moves beyond to include non-romantic love in the form of female bonds. Kyomuhendo seems to suggest that while there is a finality to romantic love, despite the intricacies and complexities of female friendships, they provide deep emotional connections that enable them to survive in a patriarchal world. If I continue my analysis on Vera's romantic relationship with Eric, I want to mention that Kyomuhendo offers us different kinds of heteronormative marriages through the representation of Vera's circle of friends and her family. For example, her friend Sheila is married to Samson, who is Eric's best friend. Her unnamed office mate in the novella is a more developed character in the novel called Halima, who has been in a polygamous marriage for 11 years. She has 5 children and 3 sister wives. In the novella, Vera's mother is married to her father, but in the novel, she's a widow, while her sister Gichanda is married in the novella, but in the novel, she has been cohabiting for 4 years and has 2 children. Lastly, Eric's mother is married in the novella, and in the novel, she is given a name Mrs. T and is separated from Eric's father. These characters are important to the narrative because they offer us varying views and perspectives on the ways in which Kyomuhendo examines love and marriage. These are middle-class working women who are able to choose what kind of romantic relationships that will fulfill their emotional and physical needs. For example, unlike Ramotulai and Isa too in Solongaleta, who are forced into polygamous relationships, Halima chooses and is content to be in a polygamous marriage. As Maria Olwason has pointed out, for most women, life in a polygamous marriage is far preferable to the social ostracism that they would have to face as an unmarried woman. She also argues that a new form of polygamy in which women choose to be in relationship could be seen as a possible challenge to the alienation and oppression in a monogamous marriage. Halima is realistic about love and marriage. She wants to be in a committed relationship that offers companionship and security for her children. When Vera meets Eric, the sexual tension is high on her side, but he would rather get to know her first before they are sexually intimate. Eric has been open with Vera about taking things slowly. He's conscious because he has had some bad experiences in previous relationships. Eric's insistence on waiting seems to suggest that in the past he has rushed into an intimate relationship instead of getting to know his partner, and it's failed. The text appears to imply that for one to have a long-lasting relationship, one has to address failures of past relationships, but also one needs to take their time in getting to know the other person. For Eric, intimacy does not depend on physical intimacy, but a deeper emotional connection. Not only does he want to gradually get to know her, he even wants to introduce her to his parents. This suggests he's not preoccupied with her looks or obsessed about sex. He wants to begin by forming a deeper, meaningful connection. Frustrated with his decision to put off having sex, Vera's insecurities begin to emerge. She thinks that Eric does not find her attractive and considers changing her physical appearance and outfit so that she's more appealing. But when she confides in Sheila about the lack of sexual intimacy, Sheila asks her, would you rather he was pushing you? The fact that he wants you to meet his parents is a good sign, Vera. Underlying Sheila's question is a realistic view of a lasting relationship. After all, she's been married for 3 years. Sheila is not concerned about the lack of physical intimacy and seems to imply Vera's priorities are a little bit skewed. Moreover, Eric should be commended for not putting pressure on her. Sheila seems to agree that it is more important that Vera should first meet Eric's parents. In most Ugandan cultures, young people generally do not introduce their girlfriend or boyfriend to their parents. When Eric tells Vera he would like to meet his parents, it indicates that he's taking the relationship seriously and thinking long-term about their future. Vera agrees to meet his parents, even though she's nervous, but her intentions are clear. She wants to impress them and understands the expectations of society to conform to particular standards of femininity and respectability. And this is why in her preparation to meet Eric's parents, she decides to dress accordingly. I'll wear my Aminumvaku skirt, which covers my silky thighs and endless legs. I can already predict what his mother will say. That is a well-bred girl. She does not expose her most intimate parts of her body. She saves them for her Haman's eyes only. This performance of respectability will determine how she is received. In addition to her outfit, it is important for her to show that she has good manners. And that's why she says she will kneel down to greet Eric's parents. Kneeling down demonstrates humility and obedience. According to Beatrice Lamwaka, while kneeling is not specific to Uganda, it is very important to the Baganda, the largest ethnic group in Uganda. A Muganda woman, a woman who belongs to the Baganda tribe, must kneel when greeting and when serving food to her husband. Women also get on their knees to greet other men and older people. In most cases, this happens whenever an encounter takes place, at home, in the garden, on the road, in the bank, wherever, whenever. Despite her calculated performance, Vera does not get the approval of Mrs. T. Vera may have failed in her attempts to impress Mrs. T, but after the visit, she succeeds in getting what she's been longing for, physical intimacy with Eric. And she admits the reality of him as a passionate lover is better than the fantasy. Granted, the sex is passionate and exceeds Vera's expectation, but they're both irresponsible when they fail to use protection in an era of sexually transmitted diseases. Luckily, none of them has a sexually transmitted infection, but this negligence leads to an unplanned pregnancy, which leaves Vera feeling ambivalent. She confesses, "To be honest with you, I'm half thrilled about the pregnancy. I would have preferred to do everything the traditional way, being proposed to, introducing my man to my mom and family, walking down the aisle, and then, even though Eric is excited about the baby, Vera has reservations about the status of the relationship. Instead of having an open discussion with him, she turns to Gichanda, Halima, and Sheila for guidance. But each of them has a different opinion on how Vera should deal with this situation. Gichanda is furious about the pregnancy. She asks, "Why didn't you wait for this Eric to marry you first?" Granted, it could be that her frustration is based on her fear that Vera may follow in her footsteps as an unmarried mother. Whereas Halima is more pragmatic. She says, "Vera, in this age we're living in, men are as scarce as a pregnant guinea fowl and women as abundant as God's mercy. You cannot afford to wait for an invitation or the ring. Just move in with him." As I mentioned, Halima is in a polygamous marriage. For Halima, the pregnancy means they are more or less a married couple. She even refers to Eric as Vera's husband. When Halima says just move in with Eric, what she implies is that now that Vera is pregnant, she should take over the domestic space and perform the duties of a wife. But Sheila, who knows Eric's character better than Vera, tells her to wait for Eric to ask her to marry him because she knows he's a responsible and respectable man. He will do the right thing. In the end, Vera takes Halima's advice and gradually moves in with Eric. This romantic relationship is markedly different from the relationship that Vera has with her female friends. Whenever Vera has problems with Eric, it is her female friends that she turns to. Although they have different views, she values their advice because as married women, they share similar circumstances where they live in a society where they understand the expectations placed on women. It is these kinds of bonds among women that allows us to see other forms of love or affection that go beyond the romantic. Kyomuhendo seems to suggest that friendships offer women support, care, and affection, which enables them to challenge restrictive patriarchal attitudes. When Vera goes into early labor, she's alone because Eric is supposedly on a work trip. She takes a taxi to the hospital where she discovers that since she's not covered by Eric's insurance, the hospital cannot admit her. It is at this moment that Eric's lack of care, honesty, and trust become more evident. Unable to get in touch with Eric in desperation, Vera calls Halima, who takes her to the public hospital, to a public hospital where she eventually delivers the baby. Here we see in the absence of the romantic partner, it is a female friend that she turns to for help. If it were not for Halima's generosity, Vera would have found herself abandoned during this vulnerable time. It is only 4 months after she gives birth that Eric finally confesses that he has a 4-year-old daughter called Martina. Understandably, Vera is devastated. Not only did he abandon her to fend for herself, but she now needs to process this new information. She feels betrayed, and so intensely she concedes, what I wanted to do right then was die. That's how bad I felt. Look, I've already invested so heavily in this relationship with my resources, my emotions, my body and soul and money. Vera begins to regret her decision of rushing into this relationship instead of approaching it cautiously by getting to know Eric. Eric's behavior leaves her feeling numb, trapped, and compromised and used. She feels that he has betrayed her trust and love. She's humiliated by the betrayal, which shatters the foundations of their relationship. In order to deal with the breakdown in trust and lack of communication, she moves out since she needs the space and time to process these underlying issues. Samson, Eric's best friend, seems to imply there is a lack of long-term commitment from both of them, which could be resolved by their getting married. Marriage in the Ugandan context mostly comprises of a traditional ceremony followed by a civil or religious service. For example, among the Baganda, this traditional ceremony is called Kuchala for the Banyankole, or Kugambo Bujedi, and Gusaba for the Bafumbira. These events provide the opportunity for the two families to meet and conduct a negotiation process that eventually determines the dowry that is given to the family of the bride. In the course of performing these rituals, it is not only about the individuals, but it's more of a communal event. Both families are invested in the long-term well-being of the couple. This suggests that when a couple is experiencing marital problems, they can approach the elders for advice. Marriages negotiated and forged by families makes it difficult for a marriage to end until all options have been considered. This sounds like an ideal way to resolve issues, but in a patriarchal society, these interventions have their drawbacks, which work against women. While there may be an element of truth in what Samson is saying, Vera feels that her concerns are not being acknowledged. No one wanted to know about my feelings. No one raised the issue of the other child and how she would fit into all this. This is where cultural expectations and an individual's desires clash. Determined to regain her trust, Eric not only gives her the space to process her feelings, but he continues to show affection, co-parent, and provide financial support. When Halima learns the reason why Vera is separated from Eric, in her typically pragmatic manner, she reminds Vera, all men have children outside marriage. The child was born way back before you even met him. He should have told me. And you do what? You already married to him. You already have his child. What do you want him to do? Swallow the other child? Throw her away? Just tell him to bring the child so you can all live together as one family. Clearly, Halima is exaggerating. Not all men in Uganda have children outside marriage. Secondly, she points out that Eric was not romantically involved with Nina, the child's mother, when he began dating Vera. She's suggesting that Vera should accept that Martina is not going anywhere, so she should change her mindset and begin to co-parent. After all, Halima is involved herself in a polygamous marriage, so she knows what she's talking about. I don't think Halima is involved. I don't think Halima is only concerned about Eric and Nina rekindling their relationship, but it's more about Eric taking responsibility for all his children. If he abandons Martina, chances are he may neglect his parental duties to Vera's children. Eventually, Vera takes Halima's advice and she moves back in with Eric. They get married and Martina comes to live with them. By the end of the narrative, Vera is not the starry-eyed woman looking for her Prince Charming, who thinks that sexual intimacy and romance are all one needs in a relationship. Instead, she recognizes that romantic love, intimacy, and marriage are complicated, and one needs to constantly assert one's independence and identity. It is interesting to juxtapose the relationship between Eric on the one hand and Vera's female friends on the other. Whenever Vera is confronted with an issue, she confides in her friends. Obioma Nairobi regards women's solidarity as an issue of survival, because this solidarity among women offers a safety net and a breath of fresh air in a suffocating, constraining environment. Women appropriate and refashion oppressive spaces through friendship, sisterhood, and solidarity, and in the process, reinvent themselves. It is through the emotional support of her friends that Vera gets the confidence to navigate the challenges that she faces as a modern woman. While I do not want to create the impression that these friendships are perfect, the novel seems to suggest that despite any complexities, the love and affection that women share for one another supersedes many differences or any differences. I'd like to conclude by returning to the prologue of the text, namely the poem dedicated to Kyomuhendo's female friends. It celebrates the joys and sorrows that women share and ends with the capitalized together. The emphasis on together underlines the connection between these friends. Kyomuhendo seems to suggest that while there is a finality to romance or romantic love, this is not the case with friendships. In a different context, Nairobi observes African women writers often make a clear distinction between love and friendship on the one hand, the painfully debilitating love and sexual relationship between men and women in marriage and outside of it, and on the other hand, the affirming and empowering friendship between women inside and outside of marriage. I would like to argue in a similar manner that the relationship between Kyomuhendo and her friends is reflected in her depiction of the bond Vera has with her female friends. In a way, this reconnection is similar to the bond that Ramotolaide shares with Isetu. She says, friendship has splendors that love knows not. It grows stronger when crossed, whereas obstacles kill love. Friendship resists time, which wearies and severes couples. It has heights unknown to love. In the process of Africanizing romance, Kyomuhendo is not only preoccupied with romantic love, but through the portrayal of non-romantic love, she underscores the value of friendship. I would like to argue that by honoring her friends and exploring Vera's intimacy with her female friends, love and marriage, Kyomuhendo offers us an African perspective that uses narratives to theorize about romantic love. and non-romantic love. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lynda, I couldn't help but in my mind go back to that night we were all together in Kampala dancing with Goretti and Sister and Grace, and just the power of women's friendships. Anyway, that's beside the point, but that is the spirit that your talk evoked. Thank you so much. While we are waiting for the audience to formulate questions, I'll say a few things. So when you sent your abstract, I started noticing what books I was reading that could count as romance. And so beginning to ask questions about what is a romance, what do they look like these days? And then I found the Mariama Bâ, and as I picked it up from my shelf, it fell apart in my hands. It's my copy I bought as an undergraduate. I didn't buy many books at the time. This was one I bought, and I remember reading it with incomprehension and resistance that my life would never look like this. You know, as a young person, just thinking all these messy things, and now reading it, every single thing that's happened to Ramatulai and her friends has happened to either me or to one of my friends. So just thinking also of that generational reading, how we read, what we are able to read and integrate into our grammars as 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, and then later on. So that's the one thing I wanted to say about time, when we are reading. And then to pick up some of your comments about what romance looks like. So two of the books that I've read this last month was this one, Borderline Fiction by Derek Owusu, and The Tiny Things Are Heavier by Esther Okonkwo. Both of them completely concerned with, well, love, sex, the useful practices of obsessions and bodies, and putting that then next to the Mariama Bâ and Kyomuhendo and seeing how different they are. So I'm asking questions about time, about cohorts, about how, not just how our lives change, but how we read these kinds of books change. So let me leave that with you and see if there's something that you want to respond to there, and then I will see some other questions coming up.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Carli. I haven't read the Owusu and the Konko, but I mean, I'm like you, I have a copy of Mariama Bâ, and I go back to it. When I read it, for me, I think I was far more, it was always interesting to look at these three friends, because some people don't, sometimes we forget about Jacqueline, but we think about only Ramtulai and Aissatou, but there's also Jacqueline. And think about how these three women are all, in a way, they are all three modern women who are entering into the new Africa and want to experience and think of how they're going to live their lives. And then they get into these marriages, and each of them has different ways in which they react to their betrayal by the husbands. And so for me, it's really important always to go back to So Long a Letter, because I think Mariama Bâ there was theorizing about love and the choices that women have, and how in these circumstances. I don't know the two novels that you're talking about, but if we look at that trajectory, if we look at that genealogy, and we go and we throw it forward now to Kyomuhendo, and not only Kyomuhendo, because it's Kyomuhendo, her new book is also on love. But if we look at what other writers like Zukiswa Wana, Angela McCall are doing, I think they're also grappling with the same issues that Mariama Bâ was grappling with. in relation to women and women and marriage, women and romance, women and love. And Kyomuhendo also, and what is also, you kind of hinted at it. I don't know if that's what it is. I haven't talked about the sexuality of women's eroticism, women feeling as celebrating themselves as sexual beings and what that means. And Goretti does that a lot in this book. And that's why I'm talking, when I talk about intimacy, Vera is very intimate, wants to celebrate that, is not afraid of talking about herself as a sexual being, as somebody who has a lot, who has different men and what she wants in a man. And so, and I think that's where you see a bit of difference from what Mariama Bâ was talking about then, because in there, it's not so much the sexuality of the women is not at the forefront, but now with the modern writing and probably in those two novels, that's what you're hinting at, is that there's this actual, like, women are sexual beings and don't want to feel afraid. In fact, in Kyomuhendo's case, she with Whispers from Vera, I think she got a lot of backlash from male critics in Uganda who were like, she's just talking about vaginas. She likes talking about vaginas. And they found that problematic. And she had to, I think Susan Kiguli was like, had to respond to some of those criticisms. So, yeah, I don't know if I've answered your question.
No, I mean, I'm just, it's a longer conversation also. I'll read you a question from Muradewin Adejonmobi, who wants to take it back to, she says, how does the publication, curious to hear about the, oh, sorry, let me see. I wonder if more can be said about the treatment of romance and friendship in this work and how it differs between the initial newspaper column, the novella, and the novel. So in other words, there are 3 iterations of Kyomuhendo's Whispers from Vera. And then in other words, how does the publication history inform the perspectives presented in the different iterations? I think you were speaking a little bit about that now when you were talking about the reception.
Yeah, thank you, Muradem. I felt bad. I was supposed to write something for her, and I never got around because of COVID. But thank you for the question. So I don't know if they are, and one of the problems with the work I do, and you would know about this, is the work is very ephemeral. So and you can hear also with Kyomuhendo, when it came out as a serialized, in the 2 different newspapers, there was no archive of it. And so when Rachel wanted her to rewrite it, that's why she kept saying, well, I don't even have a soft copy, because she had not saved it. So if she didn't have a copy of the novella, then and with the way in which the newspapers are, I don't think that one can find them in the newspapers. I don't know about the newspaper version. But the question is important because that's when I want to write more about this, and I want to write more about that process that you're asking about. But also in terms, so I assume, and it could be incorrect, that the newspaper and the serialized version are are more or less the same. When it comes to the novella and the novel, there are differences in terms of character development. And I know this is going to be controversial, and I hope, I don't know if Chomo and Goretti is on the call, but if she is, it's a question I want to ask. I felt that the novella was a bit more, for lack of a better word, risque. I felt that in the new version, in the novel version, some things had been muted, especially the sexuality of Vera. And it could be a number of things. It could be first because of this backlash that was at the back of her mind. It could be that. but it also could be, I mean, she was writing with a younger generation. It could be the younger generation were like, well, we don't want to see that much, which is also interesting in itself. I don't know if that's what they said, but for me, there's a difference. I felt that it was far more, not aggressive, far more assertive. The novella was kind of far more assertive, whereas the novel seems to have muted down some of these aspects that I'm interested in, which is the sexuality. So I'll give you an example. For example, in the novella, the Vera goes, I think she goes to Senegal. She gets a job. She goes either Senegal, I think yes, it is Senegal, that she goes to work. And she's married. By this time she's married and she's in Senegal. And then she has an affair. But in the new version, in the novel, that affair isn't there. In fact, there are hints. In fact, in the new version, I think it's more hints of sexual harassment, not whereas there it was Vera who took the initiative. So there's there are differences between the novella and the novel in interesting ways, and it's something that I would like to talk to Kyomuhendo about.
Very interesting, this idea also that in the revisions, new debates are raised,
Yeah.
things are edited, changed in
Yes.
response maybe to reviews, in response to conversations, in response to changing social mores and conventions.
Yes,
and
yes,
know,
exactly. But
in
yeah,
some
but
cases, laws.
yeah, in some cases also laws. Yeah.
Thank you. I have, there's another question here from someone. I'm sorry, I don't know your name. It's someone who looks like a little creature, and they are D-I-E-L. There's not a face. Curious to hear a little bit about a concept I encountered while reading bell hooks on romantic friendships. And these lasting relationships that women enter into that are platonic but fulfilling.
Yeah. So I haven't read that about bell hooks' ideas on romantic friendships, but when I was writing this paper, and a lot of that got cut out by the editors, I did have to, because I could not find anything on theorizing romantic love. I had to go to bell hooks and look at how bell hooks was talking about romantic love and how to define love, especially romantic love, because it had never not occurred to me until I started writing that most of the times we talk about love and we think we know what it is, and then when we ask for definitions, you can't really define it, because most of us think of love as a feeling. But when we say, so what is love? I mean, unless you go to the Bible and you have those ideas of what the Bible says about love. So it took me, I had to go to bell hooks, and it was through bell hooks, and bell hooks herself, I think, was getting the concept from somebody called Eric Fromm and she has, I think, there's 7 different things that she was talking about, that when you have, it's mutual understanding, it's about mutual respect, it's about communication, all these things that one needs to consider. So no, I haven't read about bell hooks on romantic friendships, but I will look into that. But yeah.
Thank you. There's a question that links directly to this from Ruth Venska. I really like the idea of Africanizing romance, although I have some questions about that phrase, and wonder how you define romance. I think you've just spoken about it. And do you feel the idea as an ideal or as a disillusionment of romance changes across Goretti's work?
Hello, Ruth. So the idea of Africanizing romance is actually not mine. It's not Goretti's. It's from Lynn or Modimola. She's written about it, and she's the one who talks about Africanizing romance. Well, I don't know how I define romance because romance and love are different. The reason I'm very interested in romance is because I'm actually interested in the genre. So I come to romance through looking at the genre itself and looking at the ways in which African writers, especially if you look at the imprints. So I'm interested in the imprints such as Ankara Press, Sapphire Press, uh, and Nolly books, drum beats as well in Longman. And also there are, I think Suzanne German has talked about Togolese romance, and she does that, I think, with Francophone romance. And then also there's the Hausa love stories as well. So I'm interested in that aspect of romance and how we think, how the genre helps us to think about it on the African continent and what these what even the publishers are trying to do in this respect. Is it an ideal or disillusionment? I think in Goretti's chances, when you read, especially in Whispers from Vera, it is a disillusionment. It's almost, I think there's this idea, if we think about the fairy tale, that we seem to have all bought into, but then what she's trying to show is that there's something else in the relationship that it's not ideal. They're complications, they're contradictions, they whatever Mariama Bâ was trying to say to us, that it's not always a happily ever after. I think that's what most people want to have, is their happily ever after. But and that's what the romance genre does. It stops at the happily ever after. But if you look at these different romance stories, they begin to show you that there is no happily ever after. There's happy for now. Oh,
Or happy enough.
well, that too. That too.
I want to take us in a slightly different direction, sort of staying with your genre parameters. And in preparation for your talk, I was reading what is happening sort of across the world, not just African fiction, to do with romance fiction, which is an exploding genre, it seems, everywhere. And I found two trends that I thought were noteworthy. One is the strong preference readers have for first-person narrative in romance. And in fact, in some areas of the world, there are now special sections in bookshops where first-person romance is shelved separately from other kinds of romance. So that if you want first-person romance, this is where you go. So the idea, I guess, is that the reader can insert herself more easily into the narrative if it's a first-person narration. Although I point out that with Mariama Bâ, that didn't work for me as a 19-year-old. And then the second trend that I came across, which I was surprised by, is romantasy. This mix of romance and fantasy with sort of creatures and fish and animals, which is a bit wild. Yes, so I wonder if there were sort of genre, if you wanted to say a few things about genre more broadly, if that stimulates you.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things about romance as a genre, I mean, a lot of people just think, oh, it's all meals and bones. But actually, with romance readers are quite selective in what they read. So they go for tropes. So they will go for certain tropes, and that's the trope that so they won't read. So, and they're different, the different tropes. This one could be the first person narrative, could be a trope. There could be a trope like second chance love, or enemies to lovers, or best friend, like, there's tropes that romance writers have kind of tapped into, and then the readers will then depending will find a trope and stick to that trope. And so this fast person romance sounds so much like one of these tropes on the one hand. On the other hand, it also sounds a lot to me like chick lit, because one of the things about chick lit, which I argue is develops out of romance, is a fast person. It tends to be fast person narrative. And one of the reasons I started off by talking about how Whispers from Vera was serialized, because if we look at Bridget Jones's Diary and Sex and the City, the same thing happened there, is that they all started off as these serialized narratives that then became books and then became, and in the case of Bridget Jones and Sex and the City, they became these like movies, franchise series for both of them, the TV series and then the movie series for Bridget Jones. And I teach this. I'm teaching my students at the moment. And one of the things that the students seem to enjoy about the first person narrative is that they say it's relatable. And I have both female and male students, and the male students are like, well, it's not, I don't really relate to it as a male student, but I see it around me. I can see friends around me in that who or the narrative, things that is happening that are happening in the narrative are interesting. So the first person narrative, especially in chick lit, is that what it does is that it places an emphasis on the main character, and it shows the main character as being a flawed character, like, because they're not perfect. If we think about Bridget Jones's diary, Bridget Jones, she begins the diary with a whole list of, these are the things I will not do, and these are the things I will do. And then by the end of that year, nothing has changed. And so it's almost like you feel most of the what is attracting readers to this is that there's an intention on most of us to stop do better, basically, and yet we find ourselves sabotaged by ourselves. So it gets reflected in the first person narrative, especially in chick lit. In relation, if we go back to the romance, so when we look at the subgenres that are coming up, especially within Western romance, so on the one hand, you have the tropes. So that's where probably the first person comes in. That's where the enemies to lovers comes in, the best friends. There's a whole lot of things. But then also what you have is the genres are becoming more and more diverse. So you will have very erotic. So when unfortunately, I had a student who I taught romance, who then went to work at Jonathan Ball Publishing House. And what she did during COVID is they were going to pulp a whole lot of Mills and Boons, and she just packed them in a box and sent them to me. So I have an entire library at the university that shows, and you can see the different subgenres. So you have medical romance, you have the erotic romance, you'll have cowboy, and they're color coded. And then you have paranormal, historical, Regency. You have all of these different romances for Mills and Boons. But one of the things that seems to have come up, and this I think comes out after Twilight, the Twilight series, is the romantic, the combination of romance and fantasy. Have I read any of those? No, I don't think I'm going to even start to read one of them. But when I was teaching in Stellenbosch, I had a student there, Sheena, who went and interviewed women in Rylands in Cape Town, and these were predominantly Muslim women, and they had formed the Rylands Romance Reading Club in Rylands and were reading in the public library, and they when she did her interviews at the end, when we looked at, there were about 7, they most of them, in fact, I think all of them, their genre that they liked most was the paranormal. And I thought, I mean, I just couldn't understand. We couldn't understand, what is this? Why the paranormal? And these women did not read anything else but the paranormal. So when when romance readers start to find something that they like, they then stick to those paranormals, to that subgenre. And what is happening now, and I have a student who is working on this now, is then now with social media, you have then influencers and, well, book talkers, they're called book talkers, who then also, it becomes this publishing kind of, it's an interesting thing we're trying to figure out, because these influencers on book talk promote this, right, mostly, and what you'll find, it's mostly, some of it is romantasy, where they have these book reviews about romance, and then people read and then go to the bookstores to read those romantasy books. So you'll find in bookstores, if you go to bookstores, you'll find a section for book talk, or a section that says book talk made me, read this. Book talk, YouTube, I think BookTube and Instabook. Those are the versions of book reviewers and book influencers. So it's a whole lot of different ways in which the genre is changing and keeps changing. The genre keeps reinventing itself in society. I think I don't know if I answered all the questions, but yeah.
So interesting. And what you're also saying is that readers are drawn to a particular subgenre, and so there's a comfort and a kind of preference for a particular subgenre, which then also takes one into certain communities, and you connect with other people who also like, what did you say, like the paranormal?
Yes, exactly. Because then
romance book club.
Yeah, because then when you go onto these book talks or BookTube and you look at the community, the comments, you begin to see exactly what it is you're talking about. Where someone will say, well, it will start off like, if you don't like enemies to lovers trope, don't buy. This is not for you. Try something else. So yeah, so it's then this community,
it's the
online
repetition.
community.
The repetition is part of the pleasure, knowing what one is going to find. So curating those groups.
Exactly.
And what I'm also aware of, I have 2 friends who write anonymously for romance series. One writes Muslim romance, very clean. The other one writes Christian romance, very clean. And so that's it's a particular taste, and they sell, I don't know, astonishingly many copies. Because there is a curated readership that wants a particular kind of reliable product, a product that is repeatable, reliable, and that you know what you're going to get. You're not going to be disappointed or shocked or unhappy.
And I would suppose also for parents would, if they get to know, they're like, okay, you're reading that, they wouldn't feel like, they're like, okay, your parents might not feel a certain way about you reading that romance, but would feel a certain way if you read something else. And I think this is where also E.L. James then disrupted that, because the whole thing about when 50 Shades of Grey, 50 Shades of Grey, yes. If you look at the cover image of 50 Shades of Grey, one of the things she was disrupting was this idea about romance. I mean, because romance, everyone seems to dismiss it as a genre. And why, it's not a serious genre. And why these covers of these, especially if we think about the Mills and Boon, the Mills and Boon's romance, the images there, and if you're like for E.L. James, when people were commuting on the tube, she was like, she didn't want them to feel ashamed of what they're reading. So she changed the entire cover so that it had this like tie and red rose. And people thought, oh, that was a serious, because it had a male tie. They thought it was a serious book, but it was far more risk. I mean, that's BDSM we're now talking about. It was far more risque or graphic than the Mills and Boons that are kind of clean. So there is something that is happening there, and even for the Noli books, if we bring it back onto the continent, the Noli books, which started by Moki Makura, one of the things she said she wanted to read, she started the series so that young people, 18 to 24, could read, because she felt people were not reading enough. But she didn't want any of the smut. She didn't want anything to do with HIV/AIDS, and yet most of these was set in South Africa. But what she wanted was that clean romance where young people would read and also learn. And so what she did with the Noli books, which I think was quite interesting, was then to create this addition after the novel. That once you finish the novel, she created untrademarked what she called the book zine. So I thought, and then it's a different way of reading and getting people to read. So when people then just dismiss the genre, it's like, yes, there is the story, but what else is happening around the story? What is, especially with the paratext, how are people reading? But what is also happening with the readers, not the readers themselves, but the writers and the publishing houses? What is it that they're trying to do? And I think for Bibi Bakara Yusuf, when she started Ankara Press, it was also to have a romance. I mean, there was drum beats, but people tended to think that it was drum beats and passetas. So all the East Africans here will know about passetas, which people thought were mostly for young adults. So this is more geared towards the adult people.
And you raise a really important topic here also about sex education and romance, or education around sexuality and relationships in general, that young readers go to these books to learn about the world.
Yeah.
And that, the series you are describing fulfills a very important role in that.
Yes, it does.
And then also, I was thinking of the sort of romance, if one can call it that, books I've read this last year, they've all been extremely chaotic. Chaotic, destructive, dangerous. Both of these two books I held up.
Yes.
With this absolutely stunning cover of The Tiny Things Are Heavier and then Borderline Fiction. Extremely destructive, both of them. And then I think also even books, so these are by young writers, but even thinking of books that have a lot of the themes of relationships in them, the ones that I have consumed this year have tended to be very chaotic. So then to go back to your how you started really about alternatives to romance. And I think this is where the books are sort of going. Don't look there for meaning. That's chaos.
Yeah.
Look somewhere else.
Yes. I think what you're saying is also touching on what Ruth is asking about, is romance, are these writers trying to interrogate romance as an ideal, or say that think of it as a disillusionment? I haven't, the two books that I've read this year, where what you're saying also happens, and what I'm saying, and I'm thinking about this also, is Kopano Marqua's new book called Bosadi, and that Bosadi is a plural for women. And this is about a woman in a marriage, and for people who haven't read, I won't spoil, but also it talks about, and it's about women's relationships, except in this case, it's women's, the two main characters are a woman and her domestic worker, but you can also see what is happening there. And then her relationship with her husband. And then the other book that is Dream Count by Adichie. And she has 3 female friends in there. And also all 3 female friends are in these either looking for romantic relationship. The protagonist, Chia, is obsessed with finding this a man. And you're reading her. I mean, she's quite annoying as a character, because you're reading her and you're like, you have everything. You're highly educated. You have a lot of money. You're obsessed with finding this man. And then you have one of the other characters who finds somebody, and he just kind of ghosts her, as the young people would say, ghosts her and just leaves her abandons her with the baby. And then you have the third character, Omalego, who doesn't really obsess over men. And I mean, she has men come and go, but she's not obsessed over men. And when you read the 3 characters along each side, she seems to be the one who is in a kind of a better a better way of being. I mean, she's a quite transgressive character in everything that she does. But yeah, but we're finding the same in these novels that I'm reading now, or I've read.
And so, I was even thinking that all the romance novels, if I'm thinking in terms of genre now, that I've read this year, are anti-romance in a sense.
Yes.
The protagonist ends up alone and better. And that's books by young writers and older writers, that there's a kind of, maybe to go back, what was Ruth's word, disillusionment. Yes, there's a kind of disillusionment or disenchantment of romance as the trope.
Yes.
And, an emphasis on friendship, an emphasis on building hope, and also, I think, to sort of cross media in music as well, sort of music by young women, this celebration of being on one's own, being with friends. So a kind of anti-romance mood.
And I think if you think about media and social media, on the one hand, what creates that ideal is what people curate for social media. So a lot of people curate and post on social media couple goals. So it creates this thing that there is something called couple goals, but it's a false advertisement for romance, because you then have this most people, especially young people, have this idea of couple goals, and you get into the relationship and there are no couple goals, because it's complicated. It's far more complicated. It's not a fairy tale that you find there, that you find in that. So I think, and so for me, the writers, as you rightly say, the writers then are like, yeah, let's think about this a bit more critically. And I think if we go back to when we look at Whispers from Vera, if you look at Halima, especially the one the friend in a polygamous relationship, for her then romance is not the fairy tale. For her is, are my children getting the money that they need? I mean, I don't have a problem with sister wives, because then the work is distributed. I mean, and I'm not saying sister wives is the way to go either. But I'm saying that one needs to then find a way of thinking about other ways of thinking about what it is that you want really, or what kind of love may work for you, but not have one ideal, this romance, this and one of my friends was talking about it. It's also something that has a lot to do with heterosexual relationships. I'm not, I haven't looked at, she looks more at lesbian love. It's more about this heterosexual, like society has conditioned you to find the one. You're looking for the one. Who is, what does the one, and then the one must have everything that you need. Whereas if you look at the female friendships, because there are many, no one has the one thing. They give you, the female friends all offer you different aspects. So you don't have to have one friend. You can have 4, 5 different friends. And I see this in my own life. And different friends, you go to different friends for different things. Whereas when we look at romantic love, it's like we want that one person to be everything for you. And one of my workmates, I was talking to my workmates about this, and one of them said that it's because it's almost like, because marriage, this idea of marriage is an institutionalized thing, and whereas when you look at female friends, that's not institute. You choose that. I mean, you do choose marriage. I don't know what I'm saying there, but there's something there about putting everything that you need in one person as opposed to different people, which then allows you to inhabit yourself, or you know yourself in different ways. Because if one friend disappoints you in one thing, there are other friends you can go to. Whereas if this one person that you are invested in disappoints you, then you feel like you feel devastated, like your whole world has come undone.
I don't see any more questions in the chat, and I think on this happy or unhappy ending note, I think we can draw it to a close. Thank you so much, Lynda. We look forward to seeing where you're going to take this thinking, and it's clear that you're collaborating with many people and that you have lots of students also working with you on the project. So there's intergenerational knowledge being produced. Thank you very much for sharing with us today.
Thank you, Carli, and thank you, Lexi, and thank you, everybody, and enjoy your weekend.
Thank you, everyone. Don't forget to register for the conference. Thanks, Lynda.
All right, bye.
Thank you, Lexi. We can close.